Hello everyone, and welcome to Classic Gaming Today, where we take a look at the gaming experiences of the past through the eyes of the present. I am your host, Tony, and today we're going to look at Action 52, the games. Because last week, we looked at Action 52, the history. Now it's time to dive deep into what it feels like to actually play Action 52, which is a title developed and published by Active Enterprises for the Nintendo Entertainment System back in 1992. We're going to get all into that gaming goodness in just a couple minutes, but first, as is usual, just a little bit of housekeeping up front. As always, I'm excited to be here. I hope all of you are as well. If you'd like to reach out, let me know how I'm doing, provide feedback, comments, suggestions, or just talk about classic games and technology in general. I would love to hear from you, and there are a few ways you can reach out. I have an X account with the handle @ClassicGamingT. I have an email address, which is classicgamingtoday@gmail.com, and we have our Discord server. The link is in the show notes. Discord is the best way to get in touch with me and the rest of the community around this podcast. We have a ton of fun out on Discord. We do weekly and monthly gaming challenges, prizes, rewards, discussions. It is all out there. I highly encourage you all to check it out. I also highly encourage you to check out our Patreon. It is patreon.com/ClassicGamingToday. If you want even more Classic Gaming Today goodness, including a Patreon-exclusive bi-weekly podcast, expansion pack, patreon.com/ClassicGamingToday is where it's at. I'd also like to give a shout out to our Pantheon patrons. They are ISO, Rich Senewal, David Morton, Sam Twardowski, Sean Oliver, and Maximus Marshall. Steve Novoselic, Wendell Jr., Chris Snowden, The Bay 101, Toucan Sam, Christopher Fose, Grayor, Snatch Bandicoot, NYC, Lewis W., Martin Steiner, James Nunn, Vince Gameplays, Hammond Egger, Mike Mitchell, and Marek. Thanks to our patrons for supporting the show, and thank you all for supporting the show. Whether you contribute monetarily or simply listen on a regular basis, I truly do appreciate all of the support. This is normally the part of the episode where I tell all of you why I chose a particular game for the particular episode of the podcast that I am particularly recording at the moment. That's a lot of particularity. But regardless, this time, I'm not really going to do that because I kind of already did that last episode. If you didn't listen to last episode for whatever reason, where we talked all about the history behind Action 52, I do encourage you to check it out because I believe that historical context is important for what we're about to talk about, which is all of the games across Action 52. Because without that historical context, you might not fully grasp or understand why Action 52 is the game that it is. Action 52, just to provide a brief refresher, is a game that consists of 52 different games. The thought being that you could get all of these games on a single cartridge. The maker of the game, Active Enterprises, could charge a ridiculous sum of money, $200 back in 1992, and you'd effectively be getting every single game for under $4 a game, which sounds like a ridiculously good bargain until you begin playing the game, which is exactly what I did to prepare for this episode where we're going to go through so many games. Oh my. We're going to talk about the games of Action 52. Now, as we go, I think there should be general recognition that there are 52 games here. And I don't want to create an episode that is 3 hours long because we could talk a lot about some of these games. I know you might not think that these games could warrant any sort of discussion, but the fact is they kind of do because, like I mentioned before and like I've mentioned many times in the past, when I sit down to play something, I sit down to really play it. I don't like that surface level kind of description of something. I'm not going to sit down and play a game like Action 52 and pick a couple of titles and start playing it and then immediately die or ram into an obstacle and then think, well, this game absolutely sucks. I'm not even going to spend any time playing it. No, if I'm going to pass an opinion, I'm going to play the entire experience. And playing the entire experience of 52 games, it was something. It was definitely something. I don't know what that something was. Look, it's making me not even be able to talk. I don't know what that something was, but it was definitely something. It was definitely an experience. And as I went through those games, I did play every single one of them to completion. At least whatever completion means within the context of Action 52, because some of these games are just broken. So we have to go over the context. We have to go over more of the context, not behind the history, but behind the games themselves. Because there's some things that you have to recognize completely upfront before we start talking about any of the games. Just general mechanics within Action 52 that pervades pretty much all the experience. So in Action 52, you're going to get several different genres of games. You're going to get vertically and horizontally scrolling shooters. You're going to get some action titles. You're going to get even a puzzle title or two. You're going to get games that are arcade kind of experiences, meaning that the goal is just simply to make your way through a level or get a high score or just defeat a certain number of enemies or whatever. And you're also going to get games that are kind of platforming kinds of experiences, whether that's action platformer, puzzle platformer, or somewhere in between. There are some other types that kind of they don't really fit necessarily those general descriptions, but for the most part, you're going to get a core set of genres represented across this game. And as you play the game, what you'll quickly realize is that pretty much every single game here is based on the same exact game engine, which you would kind of expect, because why would they spend so much time creating separate engines for each of these games? The thing is that you can pretty clearly see where certain pieces of this engine are reused. Unlike games like, say, UFO 50, where yes, there's most likely the same exact engine. I believe it was Game Maker Studio or Game Maker that was used to create UFO 50. The same exact game engine is used for all of those games. But you know what? It kind of is hidden from a general user. You wouldn't necessarily know that. I mean, sure, every single game in UFO 50 has similar kind of style, similar kind of feel for the most part, but every single game is unique. They all have their own mechanics, they all have their own movement, they all have their own controls, and each game feels different. As you play Action 52, a number of the games will feel pretty darn similar with one another. If you're playing a platforming game like Illuminator, it's going to feel similar to other platforming games that you might play later on in the collection, even to the point of having level designs that are fairly similar. Now, there are different characters included in each game, and each game does have some unique artwork. There's certainly some reuse there as well. But the fact is that every game of a specific type is going to feel very, very similar, like very, very similar. But that's okay. If each game was good, then having more of the same isn't necessarily a bad thing. The problem is that many of these games are either downright broken, meaning they actually crash, or games might hit a certain level and then simply repeat to the first level. You have no sense of accomplishment or achievement because you might get to level 3. You beat level 3 and then you're dropped back to level 1 again. And nothing has changed. It's just play through it again, which I know was kind of a style from the arcades as far as arcade games and trying to get high scores and continuing to move through games and repeat and repeat and repeat. But this is not like that at all, because none of these games were necessarily designed competently, which means that just the simple act of being thrown back to the beginning of the experience without any sense of, hey, I've actually achieved something, there's no reason to play through these games again. Actually, for many of them, there's no reason to play these games at all. We'll talk all about that. Like I mentioned before, there's going to be a little bit of a unique ranking system here. I'm not going to rank games based on Pantheon, Golden Oldie, Mediocre Mention, or Footnote. I can safely say that the majority of these games, if they were released in their current state, no, not the majority, every single one of these games, if they were released in their current state, meaning the current state you find them in Action 52, would be a ridiculous footnote. I mean, ridiculously low footnote in our overall ranking, because none of the games, well, there's one at least, that has an actual end condition. Other than that, the games just repeat. They don't give you a sense of, hey, I've actually beaten this game. And there's nothing here that would make you want to go back and play it again after you play through it the first time. So anyway, the games in Action 52, I just wanted to preface this as we start talking through it, that there are some games that have something here. And if they were redesigned just a little bit, might actually be something that could be fun. There's a couple of concepts here that I actually believe could be a very fun remade kind of game. But as it stands, most of the games in Action 52 are not that. We're going to talk all about and all through those games. Now, I do want to warn you, I am sitting down to record this episode, and I have all of my games completed. I have all of my notes taken. We're going to talk through every single one of these games. Because there are 52 games, and because, like I mentioned, we're going to talk at a fair amount of detail behind many of these games, it is possible that we're not going to be able to get through every single one of these games on today's episode. Because, like I mentioned just a little bit ago, I don't want to have a 3+ hour episode focused exclusively on all of the games of Action 52. I don't know that anybody would want to listen to Action 52 for that length of time consecutively. So what we're going to do is we're going to get as far as we get. And once it feels like the episode's starting to get a little bit long, then we're probably going to call it. And then we will come back for round 2. Maybe not next week, because I feel like you might need a little bit of a break from Action 52. But definitely in the future, probably within a couple weeks, we'll return to Action 52 and finish up whatever games we don't get to today. So I just wanted to mention that up front, that we may not get through all 52 games, because I do have some thoughts about some of these. I know, who would have thought? I have some thoughts about some of these games, and I definitely want to go to a level of detail that allows you to feel what I felt as I played through all 52 of these games. Before we do that, though, as we always do, we need to take a look at the back of the box, because as you all know, I love looking at the back of the box for these games. I love learning how different companies marketed their titles, especially in the era of gaming that we typically look at. Back then, we didn't have a pervasive internet. We didn't have YouTube with gameplay videos. Back then, when we made a buying decision, it was often based off of word of mouth from family and friends, reviews we may have read in magazines, and what the box actually looked like sitting on the store shelf. Did the front of the box make the game look cool? If so, we pick it up. Did the back of the box make the game sound cool? If so, we might purchase it. If not, back on the shelf it would go. So, for Action 52 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, the back of the box says, you get all 52 games in one. Get 52 new and original exciting games for play on your Nintendo system. Try to get Billy Bob out of the dungeon where he is imprisoned to save Mary Lou. Go along with the Action Game Master as he changes into one of the fearsome Cheetah Men to try to defeat all of Action 52's evil attackers. These 2 games, plus an additional 50 games on this one multi-game pack, will keep you entertained for a long time. And then there are some, what I could consider artistic renders, so to speak, on the back of the box. One featuring Billy Bob, one featuring Alfredo from Alfredo and the Fettuccinis. I think that was the name of the game. There was one that shows Hossein, which is obviously Saddam Hussein. There's the boss. There is one of the Cheetah Men named Apollo, and then a couple of other Cheetah Men called Ares and Hercules, and then a big Action 52 logo right at the bottom of the box. And I have got to say, this box is almost offensive. I mean, I guess it's not bad. I take that back. That was mean. I apologize. That was mean. The box is fine, I guess. I mean, I am generally speaking not a big proponent of the multi-pack kind of thing, especially because most of these multi-packs are very low effort. Now, granted, I'm looking at this from today's perspective because I know that most multi-pack titles are just absolutely awful. They are very low effort kinds of experiences. Oftentimes there are bugs, and these aren't really official games, so to speak. And most of them couldn't stand on their own as a separated title from all of the other games. So from that perspective, I know this is not going to be great just by looking at the box. Looking at the artist renders on the box of the different characters, I mean, the only thing I will tell you right there is that they are completely not representative of what those characters look like in-game, because the in-game graphics are 8-bit styled visuals. They're not even that great 8-bit styled visuals. So the artist renders, they just, I mean, they're there to try to attract you to the game. But I will tell you right now that even those are not all that great, and they really don't have the same style. It's just inconsistent, and it's hard for me to look at this box and divorce myself from the knowledge of what's included within the box. I will readily admit that I'm probably coming into this with a little bit of bias. But the fact is, the box just doesn't really sell me on the game. I mean, I guess a little bit, I might be curious what games were on there, but then I would see the $200 price tag and I would nope the hell out because no way would I spend $200 on an 8-bit NES collection of games that aren't even real, quote unquote, real games, because it's not like you're getting a collection of Castlevanias or Mega Men or anything like that. You're getting these brand new games, and yes, there could be goodness there, but for $200 when the Super Nintendo is already out? No way. There is no way I would have picked this up back when I was younger. Knowing about it today, the only reason I would ever pick this up is from a collectible perspective, because even though it is not great, it is still something that warrants, I suppose, collection or preservation. It does warrant preservation, I will tell you that. Even though it shouldn't be experienced, I will definitely say that games deserve to be preserved, even if they are not great experiences. This game does deserve to be preserved, but I don't know that anybody truly, really needs to play it other than to experience what this is. We're going to talk all about what this is as we go in to start talking about the more specific aspects of the game. Actually, the more specific aspects of the games, because we're now going to start talking about each game in the Action 52 collection. Whew. All right. Let's take a deep breath. I gotta pump myself up for this one. Okay. The first game on the list is a game called Fire Breathers. In this game, you control a dragon and your goal is to defeat another dragon. Conceptually, that sounds awesome. The thing is that this game is a 2-player only game. So if you try to play this as a single player, all you do is you can move around an environment, and I will admit that moving around the environment is fairly smooth. There are 8 levels of quote-unquote action that you can experience as you play the game. The thing is that if you're playing as a single player, there's nothing to do because the other dragon just sits there on the screen. There is no single player experience to this game. So what you do is you just walk up or fly up to that other dragon, you shoot him a few times, he dies, you go on to the next level, you get through all the game, and then that's pretty much it. There are a couple of environmental hazards that are included within the game. I think there's one of the castle ramparts kind of throws something at you. I'm not sure exactly what that something is. A lot of these games, you'll see the graphics and the sprite work and everything there, and you'll think, what the heck is that thing supposed to be? I don't know. I don't know that the developers knew exactly what some of those things were going to be. But hey, they're there. Environmental hazards can play a part, but unless you have a 2-player ready to go, or unless you have a second player ready to go, this is not a game that's going to monopolize any of your time because there literally is no single player experience. That being said, I could see this potentially being a little bit of mindless fun as a multiplayer kind of thing. I didn't have an opportunity to test it out in multiplayer, but I could see this being something that you would waste, say, 5 minutes exploring and then probably never play again. But it's not something that is unplayable. It's just from a single player experience, there is nothing here that you can actually truly experience other than just defeating the other character without doing much of anything. So from that perspective, it might be a fun experience with 2 players, but as a single player, this is one that you really don't have to spend any time looking at. The next game on the list is called Star Evil. This one is a vertically scrolling shooter, and you have to progress your way through a number of levels in order to face multiple bosses and hopefully beat the game. There's just a few issues with doing that. First thing is that when you start playing Star Evil, the very first experience you're going to have, you'll be dropped into the game in stage 1, and immediately there is an obstacle directly in front of you that unless you knew that obstacle was there, you are going to crash into it. I cannot imagine there's anybody that's going to play this game for the very first time, hit start, and not ram right into the obstacle in front of you at the very first stage of the game, at the very beginning of the game. Let me tell you, this does not give you a very strong first impression, because the first impression I got when I started to play the game was, okay, this is just going to be meant to torture me. Now, granted, as with many games, there is a certain degree of memorization that you have to achieve in order to continue to progress through the game. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a very user-unfriendly kind of design. So let's say you get past that and you get to the point where you can actually memorize the levels, or memorize enough of the levels where you can navigate through them fairly effectively. The next issue is that the collision detection in this game is very, very wonky. You may potentially kind of fly in between a couple obstacles, and it might look like you haven't touched anything, and you may still take some damage. There is a life bar, by the way, in this game, although it might as well not even be there. The only reason there's a life bar, from my perspective, is to make up for the complete and utter disregard for appropriate collision detection, because sometimes you'll be flying along and you shouldn't take damage, but some reason you do, and the life bar makes it so that you don't completely lose your life when you're trying to play the game. Oh, I should mention, and this is something I should have mentioned up front, none of these games have checkpoints in them at all. The way you play the game is you have to play the entire level. If you die in the middle of a level, you have to go all the way back to the beginning of the level. Now, granted, if you die in, say, stage 2, you'll start at the beginning of stage 2, which is definitely a bonus. But there is no checkpoint system in the game, and there is no continue system in the game for any of these. You cannot continue. There is no way to continue. If you lose all your lives, it is game over, start over from the beginning of the game. Anyway, you get into the game, you play through stage 1, you get to the end of the level, and you will face a boss. Potentially, because sometimes the boss decides to not show up. I'm assuming he might be on a coffee break. If that happens, there is nothing you can possibly do. You simply have to restart the game because you will now be stuck. Well, I guess you could actually lose a life. You can ram into something or have one of the other enemies kill you, in which case you could replay that level and hope that the boss comes back. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. Who knows? It's kind of like a little party game where you get to randomly choose what's going to happen, or at least randomly experience what's about to happen. That is something that, let me tell you, is a kick in the nuts. Because here's the way I normally play games, and I've told you all about this, and I've had to adjust this code, my own personal code of conduct. I've had to adjust this for playing Action 52. Normally, when I play these games, I will mostly play on emulation because it's super convenient, but I will not use save states. I will not do anything that the game doesn't allow me to do. Meaning, if a game doesn't have continues, I am going to honor that system. I am not going to continue. I'm going to replay games from the beginning if the game makes me. I'm going to experience the game the way I'm supposed to experience the game, or at least as the developers intended. What I'm telling you right now is that the developers had no intention behind the creation of Action 52 other than making this a lifeless, soul-sucking experience. So, my personal code of conduct had to change. I have used save states with Action 52. And the reason I can justify this to myself is that the game itself is inherently broken. If I get to a certain part of a stage and the boss is literally not there, that is not a knock against my skill. That is a knock against the game's design, and I will not. I've tried. When I first started playing Action 52, I tried to stick to my own code. I tried to do everything the way the game was designed. And I'm going to tell you right now, I was going slowly but surely insane. I would get past challenging sections of a stage, and I would get to a point where there's supposed to be a boss, and there isn't a boss, as with Star Evil. There are other games where the game just blatantly cheats, and sometimes collision detection that's supposed to work doesn't work. You will fire a shot, and it will literally pass through an enemy as they charge you and kill you. This game cheats and is poorly designed. So, from my perspective, I am going to cheat to combat that cheating way. The poor design, I am going to do what I need to do, because as much as I value experiencing everything and aligning with the way a developer designed a given experience, I also value my own sanity and my own personal time. And there came a point where if I can't even trust that the game is going to function the way the game is supposed to function, I'm not going to put myself through that agony. So I will say that, yes, I did use save states throughout these experiences. Now, that being said, wherever possible, I did try to use them in a way that would be not save scummy. So as an example, with Star Evil, I wouldn't necessarily save state right before a boss, just hoping the boss showed up. I would save state at the beginning of a stage so that if I had to get back to the boss and repeat a certain stage, that's fine, but I didn't have to repeat the entire game to get there. So that was kind of my compromise for all this. So I mentioned that just to say that some of these games, you really do need to make things a little bit more friendly for yourself, because the game itself is just not designed well enough and is semi-broken in a lot of ways, such that it's just completely unfair to you as a player. Anyway, going back to Star Evil, you get past stage 1, assuming the boss does show up. You get back to stage 2, or you get up to stage 2, and once again, there's a block right in front of you, which I don't know that there's a way to avoid that without taking some degree of damage. You will almost certainly take some degree of damage as you try to navigate around that one. That's fine, because like I said, you do have a life bar here, so it's not like you'll immediately die. But until you once again see that and experience it once, which will almost certainly result in your death, it's going to be an experience or a situation where it's basically set up to make you fail. You eventually get past stage 2, you get to stage 3, same kind of experience. Every single stage, by the way, has the same exact boss, assuming that the boss actually does spawn. So there's really no variation there. And then you get to stage 4, and then the game goes pink. Literally pink. Which means, I guess, you've beaten the game. In reality, that means that the game has crashed, or it's just simply not designed beyond that. So I guess there were 3 stages designed. I'm assuming this was supposed to either go back to stage 1, like many of the games in this collection, or there might have actually been at some point a stage 4. It simply does not load off of the cartridge or off of the ROM that I was playing. So at this point, I suppose I've beaten Star Evil. My overall ranking here is that the game is literally broken. Not just the fact that you can't progress past stage 3 because you literally get a pink screen of death, but because the overall game itself can potentially bug out for any reason. Sometimes there's even graphical glitches that appear as you're playing the game. They don't impact your ability to play the game, but they're still there, and suggest to me that Star Evil is definitely not a fully baked experience and is one that you might play for a couple minutes, but otherwise avoid it, because there is only evil here. There is no good. We're going to move on to the next game on the list, which is Illuminator. This one is a platforming game with jumps and ladders, and the primary focus of this game is to try to light up your environment wherever possible. You will be equipped with a flashlight, and you need to shoot enemies on the screen in order to make the screen illuminate, hence the name Illuminator. The way the game plays out is that the screen will stay lit up for a very brief period of time, which means in order to actually see what's happening, oftentimes you have to try to plan out your route in order to defeat enemies and keep the screen lighting up at different points, and then keep moving to different platforms and keep hitting other enemies to make the screen light up. This is a single screen platforming affair. It's kind of like Donkey Kong-ish in that way, in that it's not like you're navigating left or right. It's not a smoothly scrolling thing. It's a single screen platformer. But as you play the game, it's not like you have to defeat only a set of enemies on each stage. It's not like there's 7 enemies and they're placed in different parts, or they have different patrol movements or things like that. As you play the game, the enemies will respawn, and a number of enemies will respawn in different locations on different levels. And if you don't have the screen lit up by hitting an enemy, a lot of times you may not know where that enemy might be. The thing is that the way the game is designed, that's actually okay for the most part, because when the screen gets dark, it actually creates or presents a silhouette kind of world, which honestly is kind of cool. It's kind of cool to see the shadows of enemies moving around in this silhouette kind of background. I actually appreciated that game design. I thought it was kind of cool. The issue is that sometimes there are sections where it's complete blackness, complete darkness, and sometimes enemies will spawn either on top of you, on top of ladders. Oh, this is a big deal, by the way, because as you play through the game, you have to defeat a certain number of enemies per level. And as you're going through, as you get closer to that target threshold, so let's say you have to defeat 20 enemies on a level. As you get to that target threshold, enemies will stop spawning, which means you have to eliminate all of the enemies on the screen to hit that 20 threshold, and then you eventually move on to the next stage. That's totally fine. There are some stages, though, where you might become soft locked, meaning that there is no way to actually defeat the final enemy that's on your screen. Level 7 is a prime example of this, where there are two different potential configurations where if enemies spawn in that way, you literally have no recourse other than to kill yourself because you can't progress. There is no way to continue to move forward. You can't get to those enemies without hurting yourself anyway, and there's no way to eliminate them. So for level 7 in particular, that is a big problem. Because to get to level 7, that means you had to have progressed through 6 other levels of the game. And over time, because I played this game for hours, by the way, I played this game for hours trying to beat it. I did not see this game as something to save state in because it doesn't really cheat. It's just kind of poorly designed in some ways. So I spent hours playing this one. And it would be heartbreaking to get to level 7 after getting a perfect run through the first 6 levels and then having the configuration pop up where you couldn't actually progress. By the way, the reason I played hours with this game is because it is kind of unfair at different points, and you might accidentally walk up a ladder and there's an enemy that spawned stationary right on top of that ladder and you couldn't see them because the screen was all shadowed, and then you lose a life and you got to restart because as you restart each of these levels, same as every other game in Action 52, your overall enemy count resets. So if you had to defeat 20 enemies on a level, you got to 19, but you accidentally died or fell in a pit or whatever, and then you come back, you have to defeat 20 enemies on that same level again. So this is one of those games that does become tedious a little bit. There are also some pickups you can encounter as you play the game. There are batteries that you can pick up, which do literally nothing. The manual says that you can actually get new batteries and new flashlights in the game, which sounds like a cool concept. The thing is, it's just totally lying to you because they do exist. New batteries exist, but they do absolutely nothing for your overall gameplay. They add nothing to the overall game. We got to talk about the jump mechanics here. And the jump mechanics in this game are going to be seen in many other platforming games within Action 52. The way it works, and the way that a lot of the controls work for many of the experiences in Action 52, is that the controls don't seem to allow for multiple button presses to happen at the same exact time. Meaning, you know a game like Super Mario Bros. Or Super Mario Bros. I keep getting teased about my pronunciation of Mario. It's just the way I pronounce it. Deal with it. Anyway, so think about a game like Super Mario Bros. Where you're moving to the right and you have to jump over a gap. Well, you might be moving to the right, holding down your B button to run, and then you tap the A button and it feels perfect. It is so smooth. You do this little leap and it goes in a nice arc and you land on the other side and you continue running. And that is the way a game can be designed. That's the way a platforming game can be designed. Action 52 decided to not do that. And I'm assuming that it's because of the inexperience of the game's developers. But the way Action 52 works is that if you're moving to the right and you try to jump, what happens is your horizontal movement stops. And then the jump happens. And then if you're continuing to hold right on your controller, then you'll start to arc to the right. But they're all discrete events. The polling mechanism that the controller in software terms, the controller for detecting button presses, it can't poll fast enough. So what happens is everything feels like a herky-jerky kind of motion. And it makes it so that you could be approaching a pit and you press the jump button. And in a normal platforming game where you would just jump across a pit, you don't do that. You fall into the pit, which is a serious issue. The best way to jump and move in any platforming game in Action 52 is to stop moving, jump first, and then after your jump, press to the right or left or whatever direction you need to move in. That actually gives you the best possible chance of succeeding and not actually failing the jump, which is a weird thing, but that's just the way the game is designed. You have to get used to this. If you don't get used to this, you're going to have a miserable experience throughout the entire game, because there are quite a few platformers in Action 52. And if you don't get used to the mechanics, you will not have fun at all. You may not have fun at all for other reasons, but don't let that particular control choice be one of those reasons. Just learn how it goes and then make sure you remember how it goes as you play other games. So anyway, the jump mechanics definitely take a little bit of getting used to. Within Illuminator, there are 10 total levels, and if you beat the 10th level, you will restart all the way back at level 1, which means there is no game over screen, there's no congratulations screen. You simply repeat the whole thing again, and it's not like the difficulty increases for your second playthrough. It literally resets, because the farther you go in the game, the harder it gets. You reset back to level 1, it resets back to the level 1 difficulty, which really there's no reason to play through this again. This game is not what I would consider good in the way it was designed, but it is playable, and as a concept, it's actually not that bad. The implementation is admittedly off, but I will admit I did have some fun with this one, and if it were remade with any degree of competence, I think this could actually be a fun little arcade platforming experience. As it stands though, definitely poorly designed and something that it doesn't work as well as it could have. I actually have high hopes. This could be remade. I'm telling you right now, this could be remade into something that is actually fun. As it stands, still a little bit of fun, but some of the design decisions really detract from the overall experience. The next game on our list is GeForce Fighters, which is a horizontally scrolling space shooter where you need to avoid walls, blast enemies, and survive until the end of the level. This game really doesn't have much to it. There are 3 stages you need to progress through, and then it resets all the way back to stage 1, just like every other game, or most other games in the collection, and there is next to no difficulty here. All you have to do is hug a wall, keep pressing your fire button, and use your free hand to check your text messages, because within a couple minutes, you will have beaten the game. This is one of those games that I literally played for 5 minutes. I beat the game twice just to make sure I wasn't missing something, and then realized, nope, that's all there is to this one. So it's really not worth your time. It's really just a nothing. It's a what would it be? It's like a between meal palate cleanser, I guess, because some of these games can be very difficult because of the way it's designed or the controls or whatever. GeForce Fighters is the exact opposite. It controls okay. It is absolutely not difficult. It will give you a couple minutes of reprieve before you get to the next game in the collection. So maybe that was intentional. I'm going to guess not, but maybe it was. Who the heck knows? As it stands though, GeForce Fighters really not worth your time. The next game on the list is potentially one of the bigger games included on the whole Action 52 collection. This one is called Ooze. This is the first game on the collection that actually has a title screen, so you know there's something special hidden here. This one is a side-scrolling platformer, and you have to jump using the same crappy jump mechanics that we talked about with Illuminator, and you can shoot your oozes, or the oozes that appear on the screen, with a gun, as long as the game decides that it wants to detect collisions. Because like I referenced earlier, some games you will shoot your projectile and it will literally pass through an enemy that otherwise would be able to be hit by that projectile. Ooze is a prime example of where this happens, and a lot of times when it happens, it will spell the end of your run. There are 6 total levels within this game, and there is in fact a game completion screen, which means I could call this an actual game. It actually has a beginning, a gameplay section, and an end, and I truly appreciated that inclusion. In fact, this is the game where, and you might have heard about this myth. It's not a myth, it's actually reality. If you were to have beaten this game back when Action 52 first came out, you could have entered a contest to win $104,000. This was a legitimate thing. There was seriously a contest. And if you made it through the 6th and final stage of the game, you would receive a code on the screen. And I can confirm that code exists because I did in fact beat the game. And you could mail that code to Active Enterprises, and if you did that, you might win over $100,000 just for beating Ooze. Here's the thing with that contest, though. When Action 52 first came out, the very first iteration of Action 52, it featured a version of this game that was entirely unwinnable, meaning you could only play the game up to stage 2 before the game itself would crash, which meant there wasn't actually any way to win the contest. Now, in all fairness, the game would be fixed in later revisions of the cartridge, allowing you to actually beat the game. But even then, the incompetent mechanics and controls made it so that you really didn't want to play this game for the amount of time that it would take to finally beat the game. And the contest, by the way, never would actually get claimed. There'd be nobody would ever claim that contest winnings because the contest became defunct, I suppose. So after the first revision, I guess the guys over at Active Enterprises said, oh, this might have been a bad idea. And nobody, to the best of my knowledge, ever won that contest. Anyway, putting that aside, putting the whole contest thing aside, this is the point in my gameplay, my playthrough of Action 52, where I started to feel a little bit of Stockholm Syndrome beginning to set in. Because while I logically realized that this game wasn't good, I had to play it for such a long time to actually beat it that I began to get pretty good at the game. And as a result, it didn't feel all that bad to play, at least in pockets of time. Getting to that level of proficiency did require me to forget what a good platforming game even was, and forget what good platforming design could ever possibly be, because a control scheme that could only read one input at a time, enemies who occasionally phased through your shots as they chased you down and killed you, and platforming that was so finicky that you could fall off with a simple press of your directional pad, not to mention the fact that falling from too great of a height kills you even if you don't collide with anything, makes it so that any objective analysis of Ooze could very clearly reflect the fact that the game is poorly designed. Still, I did occasionally have some fun with the game, and my own drive to complete the game made me play it for hours. And this is even after I decided that I was going to use save states at the beginning of a level, because sometimes I would shoot at the enemy, and like I said, collision detection just didn't work. The enemy would chase me down and kill me. And after that happened, and I probably played it 4 or 5 hours before I decided, no, that's cheating. That's the game's way of cheating, so I'm going to cheat right back. After that, I got to the final stage of the game, and because of how the game is designed, and because of how many traps there are in that final stage, because there are certain paths through that final stage where if you go the wrong way, you'll be stuck and you won't be able to complete the stage. You'll have to restart the stage, which really, really sucks. That last stage is intensely brutal. It is a very challenging stage. You have to figure out the right path through the stage. You got to figure out how to avoid projectiles that are coming at you. A lot of times the projectiles feel like they're fired at you at the worst possible time. I would claim that the game knows something about how you're playing and uses artificial intelligence to actually figure out when and how to shoot at you. But I think that's giving too much credit to the designers behind the game, because I can't imagine there's actual real AI here. But the fact is, I played this game for hours, and I seriously questioned my overall determination to play the rest of Action 52 at several points throughout my playtime with Ooze, because brief moments of fun were interrupted by insane moments of horribly designed gameplay. I did eventually push through it, but I don't think I will ever touch this one again. It's simply too much of a filthy cheater, with your occasionally invincible enemies and projectiles that shoot at you right at the moment when you're on a platform that you can't get off of. There's even a couple sections, like I was mentioning in the final level, where if you go the wrong path, you'll reach a dead-end state and have to kill yourself to restart the level. And like I mentioned before, there are no checkpoints here. There are no continues. Every time you die, you need to restart the level from the beginning of that level. If you lose all of your lives, which I think there were 8 lives that you got in this game, so good amount of lives. But if you lose all 8 lives, it's game over, back to the very beginning of the game. So Ooze, I gotta say, it is playable, but it's not necessarily enjoyable, except for very brief snippets of time. Moving on to the next game, we have Silver Sword. This is a tops-down, vertically scrolling title where you need to navigate wildlands in order to reach your goal while combating numerous enemies who just want to kill you. There are 3 total levels in this game, and then the game resets itself back to stage 1, just like pretty much every other game in the collection. The thing is, though, I have major issues with this game. The way the game is designed is every single stage, like I said, is kind of a tops-down perspective, and you're moving through this forested wildland kind of area, and there might be trees, there might be boulders, there might be other obstacles that you need to navigate around. Okay, cool, that's fine. The issue is that the collision detection in this game can best be described as random. There might be times when you approach a boulder and collision detection kicks in before you even get close to that boulder. There might be other times where you approach it from just the right angle and you're able to climb partially on top of that boulder. Okay, I guess that's cool. There's other times where the same kind of thing happens with trees and bushes, which makes it so that navigating a level, put the enemies aside for a second. Just navigating the level as you, as a playable character, can be very, very, very haphazard. And a lot of times you will get stuck on the level geometry as you're trying to navigate the game world. That's something you could potentially combat, if not for the fact that enemies will also disregard collision detection at some times, and other times will not. And that means that enemies will occasionally just make your life, no, more than occasionally, enemies will make your life a living hell as you play this game. The way enemy movement works is that, typically speaking, the enemies move in straight line, angled kinds of patterns. So it's almost like they bounce off of the various objects in the environment. If you have an enemy that moves side to side, it'll move side to side within a certain area. It'll bounce off of one obstacle into another. Maybe it'll decide to make a 90-degree turn down, and then it'll do that until it hits another obstacle and then bounce back up. It's kind of working off of very straight line, right angle kinds of movement patterns. That in and of itself is totally fine. And in a competently designed game, that might become part of the puzzle or challenge that you need to solve for as you play through the game. Because you have to watch for enemy patterns, you got to see where they are on the screen, you got to see which obstacles they're about to bounce off of and how they could potentially bounce off in your direction to avoid them. There is something here that, if it was competently designed, could make for some challenging gameplay. The way it's designed here, though, is that sometimes enemies will just randomly avoid or ignore the collision that's supposed to be guiding their movements, which means sometimes an enemy will go down into a boulder and they'll stop short, meaning they collided with something and they're bouncing in another direction. Well, if you're not prepared for that, that's going to suck. Other times it'll pass right through that boulder, which means you can't anticipate enemy movement. The enemy movement in this game is so random that it is completely unfair to you, because that same randomness doesn't really apply to you except in cases where you're going to get hung up and stuck on the game's geometry, which means the entire experience is simply designed to kill you. You can get through this game. Level 1 sucks. Level 2, you could sort of cheese by staying to the side of the screen and just kind of moving up and shooting at the same time. But then stage 3 is awful. Absolutely awful. I have no words for how badly designed stage 3 is, how unfriendly it is, how ridiculously challenging it is. It's not challenging in a good way. It's challenging in a completely incompetent way, because the enemy design, the enemy placement, everything about it is just wrong. There is no way anybody play tested this thing and got to complete the game, because it is so poorly designed. I have such a major issue with how the game was created and designed. I think they could have done something. It wouldn't have even taken that long, I don't think, to make something just a little bit better that could have made this a playable experience. As it is not. You can play it. I don't suggest you do, unless you're ready to be really frustrated. This is one of those games that is simply irritating to play and could have been something more. Moving on to our next game, we have Critical Bypass. This is a horizontally scrolling shooter where you have to fly down a highway for 3 levels and then do it all over again because the game resets itself at the end of stage 3. This is a little bit more interesting, though, because you can fire in one of 4 different directions, either up, down, left, or right, with the last button press on your D-pad being the direction that you end up firing your weapon in until you press a different direction. There are different obstacles that you need to avoid. There are colored blocks that will randomly spawn on the screen, and there's randomly gyrating asteroids who will attempt to crash into you. This game has movement, which can best be described as haphazard, and the shooting experience really is awful. This is a game that could have been kind of fun if it had been designed as more of a twin-stick shooter kind of design, where you could move in one direction and shoot in another without impacting your ability to navigate the playfield. As it stands, though, it is not great because trying to get away from one of the asteroids that are flying at you means you can't actually shoot the asteroid that's coming at you. So you have to kind of move off to the side and then stop and then point in the opposite direction, hope that the game detects your controller press, and then fire at that asteroid and hope that you've aimed correctly, because during that time, the asteroid is going to catch up to you and will ultimately be so close to crashing into you that you might die in the process. It's a pretty difficult kind of game. I'll say, you know what? I'll take that back. It's a little difficult. It's not ridiculously difficult. It is kind of challenging to avoid the quickly moving asteroids. And even once you get the hang of the game, which you will, if you play the game for any length of time, you will get fairly proficient with moving away from the asteroids and then quickly flicking to the side and hitting your button to try to shoot at them and then progressing along your way. So this is a game that can be learned, I suppose. But the thing is that even after you become proficient with the game's controls, there are going to be occasions where asteroids will literally spawn on top of you and kill you without anything that you could do to prevent that. Now, there is a life bar in the game, so it's not like they outright kill you, but a lot of times you will be taking some environmental damage because navigating around the screen and avoiding the blocks while avoiding asteroids is pretty tricky. And like I said, the controls aren't really all that great. Like I said, it's really kind of a representation of a lot of the other games on the cartridge. It's not necessarily hard from a purely mechanical perspective, but it's hard because the design is simply punishing the players. There are no checkpoints. There's never any sense that the developers actually thought to make the experience fun for the person playing the game. This is another one where they just churned out a title, they got it done, they got it on the cartridge, and off they went. That being said, if this were designed as a twin-stick shooter, expanded and completely remade from a controls perspective, there might be something fun here. As it stands, though, it's not really worth your time. Our next game on the list is Jupiter Scope. This one is really not worth your time. There are 7 levels here of pure tedium. The situation is that you have asteroids falling down and you've got to shoot those asteroids before they crash into the planet below. You might be wondering what happens if you miss an asteroid? Well, absolutely nothing. You just wait for the next one and try to shoot it. Each level does get progressively harder, with asteroids moving faster the further into the game you get, and the number of asteroids that you need to destroy before you move on to the next level does increase as you play the game. So there is a little bit of what I would consider difficulty here. But the reality is, difficulty is mainly driven by your desire to avoid tedium and put yourself into dangerous situations just to make the experience go by quicker. You're able to move all around the screen in your rocket, and you can shoot projectiles fairly quickly. And it seems like there isn't as much of a relationship between pressing different buttons and having the game kind of hitch, like we saw with some of the platforming games so far. The smooth motion in this game is actually pretty well done. I can't believe I'm saying that, but it is pretty well done. It's just that the overall premise for the game is completely half-baked, and it makes the game a total bore to play. If you simply stay in one position and wait for asteroids to come to you and maybe avoid a couple that are a little bit off center and might nick the side of your ship, you can literally beat this game without any difficulty whatsoever. The only difficulty here is if you move into the path of an asteroid because you're trying to speed up the overall experience. That's when you might accidentally miss a shot, because even though the controls are pretty smooth here, they're not perfect. You might miss a shot and then you get rammed by an asteroid and you have to restart the level all over again. And the highest levels in the game, you have to defeat 60 asteroids in order to progress, which is a large number, and asteroids do not fire that quickly. This is one of those games that took a while to beat simply because the game itself didn't allow me to beat it quicker. Overall, I will say the game controls fairly well, and it might be the most competently made game that we've encountered so far, at least in terms of the overall controls and gameplay, but the actual scenario that you have to play through will make you fall asleep. It is a total snooze fest. Sure, experience it for a couple minutes, but don't feel like you need to beat this one. This is just one of those games that is too tedious to dedicate any real time to. Moving on, we now reach Alfredo and the Fettuccinis, which, based on the name of the game, you could almost derive the Overall gameplay stylings here, because Action 52 is not subtle. In Alfredo and the Fettuccinis, you are playing a side-scrolling platformer where your goal is to whack a bunch of pasta with your frying pan as you move through 3 levels of non-stop sort of action. I'm going to be honest. The concept behind this game is not all that appealing. But I did feel, as I started to play this one, that this was the closest thing to a real platforming game that we've gotten so far within Action 52. Sure, the jump mechanics remain wonky as ever, with the inability to truly jump horizontally without jumping first and then pressing the appropriate direction on your D-pad, and enemies can spawn and will run at you rapidly, oftentimes leading to cheap deaths. Though I do have to say that at least in Alfredo and the Fettuccinis, you have the, I'll call it ability, even though it is not an ability, but you have the ability to fall into pits and actually go through the bottom of the screen and appear at the top of the screen. And if you keep swinging your frying pan repeatedly, at least I think it's a frying pan, maybe it's a rolling pin, who the hell knows. But if you keep swinging your weapon, you will actually sort of float down to the bottom of the screen, removing the penalty of death by falling into a pit. I believe this was probably totally unintended because I can't imagine people actually flying around with a frying pan, but I kind of appreciated this particular bug in this game. Now, how did it feel like to actually play the game? I don't know. I mean, it was okay-ish. The pasta that runs at you can sometimes run really quickly. You can jump, and sometimes the collision detection is kind of off, and you get close to the pasta, you're not really at the pasta, and you will die because it's one hit, one kill in this game. If you take the overall movement and progression relatively slowly, you'll notice that the pasta will oftentimes despawn before you even get to it, because I guess it phased out of existence before it even truly phased into existence. There's a lot of flicker in this game too, by the way. A lot of the sprites for the enemies in this game flicker. It actually makes it a little bit more challenging to play because some pasta, especially in the 3rd stage, I believe, moves really quickly. And I can't believe that I'm using phrases like the pasta moves really quickly, but that's exactly what happens in this game. The pasta flies at you, and because of the flicker that's prevalent in a lot of the sprite work across the game, what'll happen is you may not even fully see the pasta animating as it flies towards you. And what that means is that it'll be closer to you before you can even humanly react to it, before you can press the button to swing your frying pan at it to crush it on the ground. So a lot of times you're going to get some cheap deaths. The bottom line is you'll get some cheap deaths. Getting a little bit too close to a piece of pasta is deadly, and like I said, the collision detection is not the best. So you get a little bit too close and you will pay the price. At the end of the day though, this is about as close to a real action platforming kind of experience as we've experienced thus far within Action 52. So from that perspective, and honestly, I'm not sure if it's just the Stockholm Syndrome talking or what, but I didn't totally hate this one. I didn't like it either, but honestly, it's not a completely horrible offensive experience. It's just a mostly horrible offensive experience. But compared to some of the other games, this is not actually all that bad for a quick play session. Moving on to our next game, we have Operation Full Moon, which is an auto-vertically scrolling shooter, meaning it automatically scrolls vertically and you can move around the entire playing field as you see fit. So you will constantly be propelled forward, but you can move anywhere on the screen as you're moving forward with the rest of the environment. The way this game works is you're kind of in a tank kind of vehicle and you are constantly rolling forward. As you move around the screen, you can avoid different obstacles, you can fire your own weapons at different turrets. The turrets in this game, by the way, can only fire horizontally, which is kind of interesting. It makes it so that avoiding these turrets and avoiding the turret fire is incredibly easy, even on later stages where the turret fire does get quicker. But for the most part, turrets in this game are not really all that big of an obstacle, at least from a projectile perspective. They're actually more of an obstacle from a damage avoidance standpoint, because if you hit an obstacle, you're going to die, and that is not a good thing. Bottom line is, though, All this game is an auto-vertically scrolling shooter where you have to avoid obstacles and hopefully take out as many turrets as possible to raise your score as high as possible. That's pretty much it. Here's the thing though. It's actually a fun little game, at least for an Action 52 title, because so many of these games just don't have, they're limited in terms of the overall controls, and the mechanics don't work right with one another. At least here, this feels like a game and controls that I wouldn't mind playing. And in fact, I didn't mind playing this game at all. There are 8 total levels, at which point the game either resets back to stage 1 or it simply crashes. For me, I experienced the latter, where I got up to the end of stage 8 and then the game just kind of froze. The music was still playing, sort of. It got really weird. And basically what happened is the game started to almost shimmy a little bit, like the visuals, and there was nothing I could do at that point. All I could do was restart the game and play something else. But I did, I guess, quote unquote, beat the game within the context of Action 52, because with Action 52, the best you're going to get is a game over screen or resetting to the beginning of the game, or potentially just crashing out. That's exactly what happened to me. I crashed out with this one. The fact is, though, this game doesn't feel that bad to play. The controls feel fine. The gameplay feels smooth. As you move through the different levels, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but the environmental diversity is actually not bad. Now, when I say environmental diversity, all it is the color of the graphics. I mean, you're not going to be talking about lush trees and forests versus sandy deserts versus wild grasslands or frosty tundras or anything like that. You're not talking about that level of detail, but each environment is distinct across the 8 levels. And even though all it is just a color overlay or a color palette swap, it still made the game feel kind of different. This is one of those games where I feel like if it was given a little bit more time and you had more enemies, you actually had enemies added to the game, because other than the turrets, there are no enemies here. But I feel like if you had a game, if you had this kind of game, you added some additional enemies to it, you added some additional mechanics, maybe some weapon power-ups, I think you could actually have a game. And actually, this felt to me kinda, sorta, pseudo like a very simple Gunsmoke styled experience. If anybody ever played Gunsmoke, either in the arcades or on the NES, where you're constantly moving up and you're facing some random enemies here and there, and you can kind of aim where you want to aim. Now, of course, in this particular game, in Operation Full Moon, you don't aim diagonally or anything like that. You simply aim straight ahead, and you have to move your vehicle around to shoot wherever you want to shoot. But it kind of gave me that same kind of experience. And honestly, it was not that bad. The game itself is not very challenging. The hardest part of the whole experience is making your way through some tight openings in a couple of sections of certain levels. And I will say that because the Action 52 game designers really like to screw with the players, there is one stage, I believe it was the beginning of stage 3, where there is an obstacle immediately in front of you as soon as you spawn into the game, which unless you know it's there, you're going to crash into it and lose a life. They just really like messing with you, because this is not the only game. I mean, there's been at least a few games now where there is an intentionally placed obstacle right in front of you at the beginning of a level that, unless you had already played the game, you will have no way of knowing that you have to actually avoid that obstacle. I don't know whether to golf clap that kind of design or just simply ram my head into a wall because it's so unfriendly. But regardless, it's there. Once you play through a level for a given time and you see that that's there, that you see the obstacle is there, you won't make that mistake again. But still, I was not appreciative of, and generally speaking, I'm not appreciative of those kind of design decisions where there is intentionality behind trying to make a player's life a living hell. So I just don't like that kind of design. But putting that aside, this is not a bad game. And it's probably my favorite game out of the first 10-ish or so that we've looked at so far. It's definitely simple, but it is kind of fun. Moving on to our next game on the list, we have Dam Busters, which is a side-scrolling, semi-tops-down perspective kind of game where you navigate a maze-like path with mostly only a single way forward, but you are restricted here. There is a path. You cannot deviate from the path. There's going to be some sections where it literally looks like a maze and you have to just stay on that path, just moving forward wherever you can. You can shoot in this game, and that's a good thing too, because there are various enemies here that will try to shoot you. Generally speaking, it's better to avoid enemies than shoot at them, because if you find a stationary enemy, that means the enemy is not going to chase after you. And in this game, as you kill enemies, enemies may respawn, and when they may respawn as moving enemies. Those moving enemies are a pain to deal with. They will chase you all around whatever maze-like environment you're in at the moment. They will fire projectiles at you. They will try to chase you down and actually ram into you. It's just not a great experience overall. If you can find stationary enemies, your best bet is to try to navigate around them rather than shoot them, because if you shoot them, you're opening yourself up to a respawn with a way worse enemy to have to deal with. Overall, the game isn't terribly challenging, but it can occasionally be frustrating because some of those enemy respawns might happen right in front of you and may run right at you without giving you any opportunity to do anything about it. There's also, as you play the game, there are some sections where you might pick up a power-up and you think to yourself, oh cool, that's like an extra life, or that might be giving me some extra power to deal with some of these enemies, or maybe it'll give me a shielded hit where I can hit one of the enemies and not die. No, not really. I don't even know what that power-up thing is. It kind of looks like an extra life token, but it does absolutely nothing. I have tested it, I have walked into it, I have picked up that supposed power-up, and ultimately nothing happens at all. It doesn't improve my survivability, it doesn't improve my damage, it doesn't give me an extra life. It is simply there to pick up for some reason, most likely a design decision that never came to fruition. The only thing I can think is so close. They were so close to actually adding in some additional mechanics here, but ultimately failed to hit the mark. The controls are also a little bit finicky, and I will say that I had some difficulty aiming in the appropriate direction all the time, because sometimes you'll kind of get stuck on the environment, and in order to actually fire in the direction you want to, you may have to move backwards before you move forwards to re-aim yourself. I'll give you an example. Let's say you were moving off to the right, and you're stuck in the wall. Well, you can't actually fire. Your ability to fire your projectile is going to be impeded. Not because a wall is there, but because for whatever reason the controls decided you can't shoot anymore. Rather than simply pressing that same direction and shooting and getting out of that predicament, you have to actually back up and then inch forward a little bit, and then you'll be able to shoot again as long as you're not connected or held up on that particular environmental object or wall or whatever it might be. I don't think that was an egregious issue. It was a little bit of a frustration, especially because sometimes enemies are running right at you and you want to just try to shoot them and then you can't. So from that perspective, it was definitely a bit of a frustration, a bit of an odd design decision. But overall, it's not a huge deal, I guess. And remember, I am talking about all of these games from the perspective of Action 52. I am not suggesting that any of these games up to this point can really be standalone experiences. And if they were, I would be ripping them new ones. But as an Action 52 game, not horrible. This one was, I would consider, semi-fun for the 2 levels that the game lasts. And yes, you heard that right, there are only 2 levels included here. According to the internet, because I do check myself a little bit, I want to make sure that I'm interpreting all the games correctly, or at least reasoning through all of the games and taking into account anything I may not have personally experienced. Like as an example, there are some games where it says it crashes after a certain stage, and maybe I didn't experience that because I'm on a different revision of Action 52. So I do check the internet as I'm going through some of these games. And according to the internet, for Dam Busters, it's surprisingly easy to get yourself trapped in a dead-end state, because once you move far to the right, you cannot move back to the left. But honestly, I never encountered that kind of thing at any point when I was playing the game. So I've got to imagine that unless you're being kinda careless, you're probably going to be okay here. Even with that though, the fact that there's only 2 levels here makes this one feel more like a proof of concept than an actual game. Even with that restriction though, it's still one of the better games that we've played so far. It's surprisingly okay. This is definitely not my favorite, but I could kind of see what the designers were going with this one, or what they were going for with this one. And it's not offensive. That's the best I can say. It is not offensive. Moving on to our next game, we have Thrusters, which is a vertically scrolling space shooter. This one, similar to many other games in Action 52, and I can't recall if I've mentioned this yet, but in many of the games in Action 52, if you fire your weapon continuously and in rapid succession, you can potentially limit enemy spawns or impact an enemy's ability to fire projectiles at you, because the game can only handle a certain number of objects on screen at a time. And if you just keep spamming that fire button, you may make it so that the game can't spawn anything else. This is absolutely an interesting glitch, and some might consider just constantly pressing your fire button as cheating with that limitation in mind. But honestly, I usually play shooters and vertically scrolling, both vertically and horizontally scrolling shooters. I usually play them by spamming my fire button anyway. So is it really cheating if you're playing the game the way you would normally play any other game of this type? I don't know. The jury's probably out on this one. But as we speak specifically about Thrusters, it's kind of just simple. There are 4 total levels that you get to play through. If you had the original revision of Action 52, you could only make it to level 2 without the game crashing. In the revised revisions, you actually can make it to level 4 before the game resets itself. So consider myself lucky. I did have the version of the game that let me get to level 4. This one, similar to some of the other games we've been talking about recently, isn't bad. It's just ridiculously simple and not challenging at all. In fact, it's so easy to get through that I can't imagine many people are going to have an issue with this one. That being said, this is another title whose mechanics and overall gameplay feel more refined than most of what you see in Action 52. We are on a roll because the last few games we've talked about actually didn't feel horrible to play. This one in particular is a bit too simple to be truly worthwhile, but it's not a bad time overall. Which brings us to our next game, which is The Haunted Halls of Wentworth. This is a side-scrolling action platforming title. It's attempting to be a spooky kind of experience, because here you fight all different kinds of ghosts and creatures. The music is kind of spooky. Actually, the music in this one is not that bad at all. It does a pretty good job of evoking a spookier kind of feel. Now, remember how I had just said that we were on a roll with titles that I would consider not all that bad? Well, our streak just came to a screeching halt. The thing is that The Haunted Halls of Wentworth, from a concept perspective, isn't really that bad. You get to navigate several different levels, 3 of them to be precise, and defeat enemies as you navigate a treacherous side-scrolling 2D environment filled with hazards and tricky jumps. This one does utilize the same platforming controls as other platformers in Action 52, with horizontal jumps best utilized by jumping and then moving in the air using your D-pad, though I will say that this one is a bit smoother than some of the other platformers that were included in the game. That being said, the overall movement and motion of your character here is kinda slow. This one, to a degree, reminded me a little bit of Dragon's Lair for the NES, which, if anybody remembers our discussion about Dragon's Lair on the NES, will recognize that that is not a flattering comparison. It's just not. I mean, actually, this one is probably a little bit smoother than that, or at least a little bit less offensive from an overall design perspective, which is saying something. But as you move around the levels in this game, you will navigate a bunch of different platforming sections, you'll avoid obstacles, and you'll also get to throw what appear to be either knives or crucifixes against the various ghost-like enemies that you'll encounter. And if you hit those enemies with one well-placed throw, you will kill them. On the surface, that sounds mostly okay, until you realize that this game was designed by a madman, because every single enemy will hone in on your location, and you cannot avoid enemies in this game. You know how in so many games you can jump over enemies and run off to the side of the screen and maybe they'll be left in the dust, or you might be able to just avoid enemies in general as opposed to having to defeat them directly? Well, there is no enemy avoidance in this game because every single enemy, as soon as they spawn, will all set a beeline for you, whether they're coming straight at you, coming down from a higher height, or zooming up from a lower height, and that can happen from either behind you or in front of you. The main issue here is that you'll often be in a position where you literally cannot hit the enemy before they reach you. And that's for standard enemies like slower moving ghosts, where you can technically move around, maybe back up a little bit, then turn around and fire off a crucifix before they get to you, thereby defeating the enemy and not losing a life. But there are some enemies in the game, like the Zooming Skull. I don't know what its real name is, but there is a Zooming Skull that will sometimes appear that will chase you down rapidly. If that appears on the screen and you're not in a position where you can actually dedicate the appropriate attention to try to take it out before it reaches you, or sometimes you're just on a platform and you literally cannot reposition that enemy, I can almost guarantee that you will die. Now, assuming you do actually get past the enemies that are included in the game, you still have to deal with some hellacious platforming sections, especially in stages 2 and 3, which add unkillable spiders as an environmental hazard which need to be avoided by timing your jumps from one platform to the next. Oh, wait a second. Did I say jumps? Because remember, this is an Action 52 platformer, which means if you jump from too high of a height, you will die even if you don't collide with anything. In games like Ooze, like we talked about a little bit ago, the distance between jumping and dying is a little, I can kind of wrap my head around the height, even though you're not colliding with anything. Maybe you just have a weak heart, or you have a heart condition, and any sort of fall could potentially jolt you and make your heart stop. In this one, it's literally less than a body height, less than the height of your character. You can jump and fall and you will die even if you don't collide with anything. This is absolutely egregious game design. I do not like it. I don't just not like it. I really hate it. I really hate how random it feels sometimes when you die here. This is a super unfriendly game to players. The randomness of enemy spawns, the fact that they are enemies you cannot avoid, and the unkillable environmental hazards that, combined with the platforming and the inability to actually jump from certain platforms to others, make it so that this game is designed to unceremoniously kill you every chance it gets. This is one of the most user-unfriendly games that we've played yet, and even beyond, it is just a user-unfriendly experience across the board. Luckily, when you do reach the end of a given level, you will face a boss which is super simple to deal with. The boss is the same for every single level in the game. It's effectively a huge spider, and you can kill it easily by simply standing to one side of the screen and peppering it with crucifix throws. Is it a cheap victory? Well, sure. Yes, it is. But honestly, I will take it because this game is anything but fair to the player. You will get through 3 stages if you actually decide to play this one, but if you do, you have 3 stages to get through, and if you do manage to beat that 3rd stage, the game resets just for you to do it all over again. From my perspective, that is a big no thank you. I will not play this game again. I thought, honestly, when I first started playing this game, I had some high hopes, because it didn't seem all that bad on the surface. But after I started playing the game, and after I saw just how unfriendly the game design was, especially the enemies that will literally zoom in on you, and you have nothing you can do. I mean, at certain points of the game, you can react. But there's other times where there's literally nothing you can do. You will be trapped and you will die. Absolutely cheap game design. So, how did I feel about this one? The only thing I could say is that this is the kind of game that you show to other people as an example of clueless game design. It's offensively unfriendly to gamers, to actual people playing the game. And from my perspective, you should avoid this one at all costs, even though it could have really been something special. It could have been, it felt kind of spooky when you first started playing the game. It didn't feel quite so bad to control in comparison to other Action 52 titles. This is one that I think could have been okay, but it's not. It is absolutely not. And honestly, as I now reflect on, I think this was the first quarter of the games included with Action 52. Yes, this was through number 13. So we've gone through a quarter of the games. And I've got to tell you, the general feeling I have right now, I don't know. Oh man. I will say, look, I think we got to take a break. I think we got to take a break from going through Action 52 right now, because I'll let you in on a little secret. I just reliving all of these experiences as I'm talking through it. It's not doing the best things for my psyche right now. Look, I played Action 52. Isn't that telling you pretty much everything you need to know about this situation? Now, don't get me wrong. There are some games here, and like I said, we've only looked at 13 so far, and this is where we're going to call it for this particular episode, because as we're starting to look through the list, there's still 39 more games to talk through, and unless we turn this episode into a 3-hour mega marathon, we're not going to get through all of them. So we might as well call it at the quarter point and vow to come back at some point to continue. Action 52 so far, after the first 13 games, is definitely not an experience that I would encourage people to try out. But I will say that it strikes me that there are not more absolutely broken and offensive games here than what I would have imagined. Out of the 13 that we've looked at so far, there are definitely some that you should avoid absolutely, that I just would never, ever, ever recommend you to try. But there are other games that are kind of just simple. And does that make them bad? Or does it just make them not finished or just too simplistic? If that's the case, is it really that bad? I don't know. And then there are a couple games that I feel like if they were worked on more, could actually have turned into something. I don't know what that something would eventually be, because the something we have is not the something that would actually make these worthwhile games to play. But at the end of the day, it's not. All right, Action 52 is not creating a great impression. But is it as offensive as people on the internet would make you believe? Honestly, up to this point, sort of, I guess. I don't know. Before I started recording here, and after I had played most of Action 52, I did watch some videos of different people that were trying out the game, and they were making their own tier lists about stuff. And the issue, and I've relayed this issue to all of you multiple times before, the issue is they sit down and they play one of these games for 2 minutes, and then they pass judgment on it. They play a game like Silver Swords, I think was one of the games. Yeah, Silver Sword. They play a game like Silver Sword for 2 minutes, and they automatically declare it to be better than, say, Illuminator. And the one video I was watching had Illuminator really far down the list. They actually had Star Evil ranked above Illuminator. And I'm thinking to myself, you are no freaking way. Illuminator has its issues. Illuminator, by the way, is the game where you have to shine the flashlight at the vampires or the enemies, and it makes the screen flash up and brighten up for around a second or two, and then it goes back to darkness. There are issues with that game. There are issues with the platforming across Action 52 in general, but Illuminator probably had the best game concept out of any game that we've covered so far. So to automatically rank it lower than Silver Sword, which from my perspective gets to a level of difficulty that borders on just, and it's all driven by obtuse game design. It's not driven because it's meant to deliver a worthwhile challenge. But to say a game like Silver Sword is better than a game like Illuminator, no freaking way. No. Go sit down and play each of those games for a couple hours like I did. And then you tell me that Silver Sword is a better game. No, It is not. Silver Sword, if you just play the first 2 minutes of Silver Sword in the very first level, sure, you might walk away from that one thinking, oh, this isn't such a bad tops-down action-heavy kind of experience. But no, go through the game, actually try to beat the game, you're going to find a ridiculous experience. And the design is just so bad in some cases. So I don't know what I really want to say at this point. We've covered a quarter of the games. There is definitely more to come. I don't know. Should we continue? I'm going to open this up. You guys let me know what you think. Should we continue our Action 52 deep dive next week? Or should we put a little bit of a break in between the Action 52 stuff and some other stuff? I don't want to make this an Action 52 podcast because, look, a quarter of the games, 13 games, and it took us almost an hour and a half to cover those 13 games. Now, I know that some of the games coming up are not nearly as deep, and I use that term loosely, nearly as deep as some of the games we've covered so far. But the fact is, if I'm going to play these games and I'm going to dedicate the time to actually playing them, I want to give them the appropriate justice if they deserve it, or at least I'm going to talk about them in some degree of detail. So you all let me know out on Discord or email or whatever you want. Send me something by Thursday this week. So by June, what is the date today? This is releasing on the 15th. So the Thursday is the 18th. Let me know by June 18th what you think we should do for next week's episode. Should we continue Action 52, or should we take a little bit of a break, do a palate cleansing kind of experience, and then come back to Action 52 a little bit later? Let me know what you think. I will listen to the feedback that we get. Actually, I will post a poll. Out on Discord. So if anybody is not out on Discord and you want to participate in that poll, definitely go out to Discord and sign up. The link is in the show notes. So sign in Discord and have your voice be heard on the poll. Whatever the decision is by Thursday, June 18th, that is the direction our next episode is going to go in. So it's legitimately up to all of you. Do we continue talking about Action 52, or do we take a little break before we circle back to Action 52 maybe in a couple weeks? We'll see. It's entirely up to you. But what I will say so far is that Action 52 has been an interesting experience. That is the best way I can put it so far. We'll see how it all plays out as we continue diving deep into Action 52. That was our episode covering the games of Action 52, or at least the first 13 games of Action 52. I hope you all enjoyed listening to it at least a little bit more than I enjoyed creating it. If you'd like to reach out, let me know how I'm doing, provide feedback, comments, suggestions, or just talk about classic games and technology in general, I would love to hear from you, and there are a few ways you can reach out. I have an X account with the handle @ClassicGamingT. I have an email address, which is classicgamingtoday@gmail.com, and we have our Discord server. The link is in the show notes. Discord is the best way to get in touch with me and the rest of the community around this podcast. We have a ton of fun out on Discord. I highly encourage you all to check it out. I also highly encourage you to check out our Patreon. It's patreon.com/ClassicGamingToday. If you want even more Classic Gaming Today goodness, including a Patreon exclusive bi-weekly podcast expansion pack, patreon.com/ClassicGamingToday is where it's at. Before we sign off for the week, I do want to mention that our next episode is going to be either focused on more Action 52 or potentially a different topic entirely. Like I mentioned earlier, the power of what happens next week is in your hands. So go out to Discord, respond to the poll, and let us all know what you think. You will shape the next episode of the podcast. At the same time, I recognize you're likely listening to this podcast on any number of podcast services. And if you would feel so inclined, it would be great if you could leave me a review. This is not about trying to bolster star counts. This is not about trying to harvest a ton of 5-star ratings. Though if that happens, awesome, it means we're doing something right. No, what it's really all about is trying to deliver the best possible podcast I can. The only way to do that is to get feedback from all of you, the listener community, to make sure I'm hitting the mark and delivering the content you all want to listen to. We get new listeners every single day, which is simply amazing. I want to continue to grow this community and continue to make the best possible podcast I can. We'll be back in around a week with our next episode, where you have the power to direct what that next episode is going to be. Until then, remember, sometimes the games of the past are just as good, if not better, than the games of today. Goodbye, everyone.